Thank you for joining us for the last of our presentations in our Repel the Invaders series. Today we're going to cover invasive deciduous and evergreen vine species. And I want to do extension for hosting all 4 of our presentations. So I am Amber Slaughterbeck. I'm a regional specialist with Southern Indiana Cooperative Invasives Management. But I am not the only regional specialist in our state. So there is a great number of talent all across the state willing and ready to help you out with all of your invasive species questions. So find your closest regional specialist on the map and reach out to them. All of our contact information can be found on Southern Indiana Cooperative Invasives Management website. And that information will be at the end of this presentation, but it is sicim.info. So find your regional specialist and reach out to them. We are there to help you out, and we also do management plans for you. So we will come to your property and let you know what invasive species you are dealing with. What is an invasive species? When I talk about an invasive, I'm referring to a non-native organism that is in our state, in Indiana, that isn't supposed to be here, and its introduction has caused or is likely to cause harm, either economical or environmental, harm to our health, harm to our animals' health, and also harm to our plants' health. An animal encompasses our wildlife, our livestock, and also it can be our pets. So there you can see 3 different types of organisms that are invasive in our state. The vine species with the berries on it is Asian bittersweet, and we are going to cover that today. Then you see the wild feral hogs in the corner there, and also the emerald ash borer insect is pictured there, which many of us are aware of because it has devastated our ash trees in Indiana. So those are all invasive species. SICM focuses on plant species. So we are going to cover some invasive plants. But first, we need to determine, is this an invasive species? Especially when it comes to vines. We get a lot of images of vine species that our citizens in Indiana might think are invasive because of the way that they grow. So all over the ground, and then climbing up that tree there, you see a vine. And just because of its habit, you might think, well, that has to be an invasive plant. But that is actually native poison ivy. And many of you are probably thinking, oh, I do not like poison ivy. But this is a great plant for wildlife, and it is native, so it cannot be called an invasive species in our state. It's actually quite beneficial for our native wildlife. Another vine that looks like it's an invasive species pictured here because it's climbing all over this power line and clearly consuming this area. You must think that's an invasive as well, but it is native grapevine. So again, that's a great native plant for wildlife. Not in this situation is it a great species to be climbing all over that power line, but it is still a great species to have in our state. And lastly, another example is this beautiful vine here, but it is climbing all over the side of this house, and it is native Virginia creeper. That's what it looks like in the fall, and it is a native species that also fosters our native wildlife. That's as it begins to grow. It's a nice bright green color, and then in the fall it turns that brilliant red. So maybe not so great on the side of that house, but in the woods, in its natural habitat, it is a really great species to have for our native wildlife. So just because it's growing everywhere and spreading doesn't mean that it's invasive. So start with the fact that it has to be non-native to be called invasive. And when you're talking about beginning to control these invasive species, SICM has a really great general chemical calendar of control that we will provide for you in a box folder that you can use all year long. So what you will do is you'll find what species you're wanting to control, listed there on the left. You'll look at what month you are currently in. You will find the chemical control suggestions there in the color, and you'll find that color at the base of the document. So it corresponds with that color at the base of the document, and you'll see if it's suggesting foliar spray from May through September. You go down to the bottom of the document and it says foliar spray with 3% glyphosate and 0.25% non-ionic surfactant. So everything is color-coded and corresponding for you to help you out as you move through the year so that you can begin to prioritize these invasive species on your property. Certainly this is not all of the invasives in our state, but this is a good stepping stone. Today, for our purposes, we're going to cover every single one of those vine species listed there. So you can begin to start controlling them in June. So that is a great time to start getting up and getting ready to control these invasive vine species that you see there. The deciduous Wisteria, autumn Clematis, Oriental Bittersweet, and then also Kudzu. You can start preparing to start getting rid of these invasives. This is a two-sided document. So on the back side, you can see herbaceous, grasses, and also trees listed there. But at the bottom of the document, you can see what we're talking about when we say glyphosate or we say triclopyr, imazapyr, and surfactant. Following that, it shows you some brand names, but those are not all the brand names listed. Those are just some examples. Number one rule is no matter what herbicide you are purchasing, when you purchase that herbicide, you read the label front to back. All the information you need about how to properly use that herbicide is within that label. So make sure that you're reading it completely. So let's talk about some invasive vine species that are in our state. Wanted to start with maybe a vine that you're not quite familiar with, called Japanese hop. This one was introduced in the mid to late 1800s as an ornamental, and you're going to see that throughout the presentation. Quite a few of these vine species that we have that are invasive in our state have been introduced as ornamental vines. So they were introduced in the landscaping. So this is an annual vine that can grow up to 35 feet in that 1 year. The seeds can be exhausted in approximately 3 years. So you can consider that when you're managing this species. Leaves are toothed with 5 lobes. You can see that in the image. Oppositely arranged and very rough to touch. This plant will actually grab onto your skin and can tear your skin. It's covered in these hooked hairs that can be quite painful. It does have very small, not very showy green flowers that do not have petals, and the fruit is yellow to brown and wind and water dispersed. It spreads easily along waterways and along river floodplains, and especially along those railroad right-of-ways. So you have 3 great images there to show you what this plant looks like. And this is one that we are looking for reports of. So if you think that you've seen this plant across the state, please do take images, and I'll tell you how to report them. But make sure that you're grabbing some photos while you're there, some great shots of the leaves and of the vine. And if there's flowers, make sure to grab some images of that so that we can report that species to understand where it is and how it's spreading. Here's another image of the leaf up close. And there's the flowers and fruits. They're not very showy at all. Next on our list is Sweet Autumn Clematis. This plant was introduced from Asia as an ornamental in the late 1800s. It is semi-evergreen vine with opposite compound leaves with 3 leaflets. And these leaflets have smooth edges. In Indiana, we have a native clematis, but it has a toothed edge on the leaves. So make sure that you're identifying correctly so you're not controlling one of our native species. This invasive will have a smooth edge. It does have white fragrant flowers in late summer to early fall. It has wispy spirals of seeds that will be wind dispersed. So you can see how this might be spreading. But it also will blanket plants and structures, including shrubs and small trees. So there's a good picture of the flower. This is what the seeds look like. There's that 4-petal flower that you're going to look for. This is an image of a plant that has escaped landscaping. So this one has been dispersed by wind, and now it's covering the side of the road, and all of the plant vegetation you can see is just blanketed with this invasive vine. So you can see it'll be taking all the resources away from the native species that are there. Next up is Japanese honeysuckle. Introduced from Japan through England in the early 1800s as an ornamental and also for erosion control. This is a woody vine. It's trailing or climbing. It will girdle your small trees and forms dense mats in all the canopy and shades out everything in the understory. It has opposite oval leaves with usually a smooth edge, but sometimes the young leaves can be lobed. You can see the flowers pictured there. They're tubular, white to light pink, and will turn a yellow color with age. So you might have all of those same colors of flowers blooming at the same time. You have the white, the pink, and the yellow all on the same plant. The berries will turn from green to black when ripened. You can see that in the image there. This is what the leaves will look like when they're lobed. There's an image of the flowers for you. You can see that they're white and yellow on the same plant. And here's a nice up close image of the entire plant for you. Okay, periwinkle. Periwinkle was introduced from Europe in the 1700s as an ornamental ground cover. This plant is also trailing, but is an evergreen perennial with slender stems. The leaves are dark green, very shiny, elliptical with white midveins. And they do have that light blue to lavender flower in the spring. The flowers are not always present though. When it spreads in a dense canopy, sometimes it will not produce a flower. So you'll want to identify the foliage without the flower. It spreads quickly and forms thick carpets. As you can see in the image, it will suppress all native plants. So you won't have any wildflowers. You might not even have any tree saplings that are growing. Another unfortunate thing about this plant, especially if it's in your landscaping, is it's toxic to grazers, birds, and also your pets. So it is not a good plant to have around. Here's what the flower looks like. The flower can be varied with different colors, so it can be pink or light blue or purple. And this is what the foliage looks like. You can see it's an evergreen. Even underneath the snow, you can find these leaves still green. So late in the year is a really great time to control this plant when all the other native species are not present. Since this is an evergreen invasive vine, you can control it late into the year. Another evergreen invasive vine that you can be controlling late in the year is purple winter creeper. Introduced from Asia in 1907 as an ornamental ground cover. It is woody, semi-evergreen, and will climb 40 to 50 feet, killing your shrubs and your trees. You might think, well, how does it do that? It will actually rot the bark of the tree. It holds moisture along that vine up the entire tree, and it'll rot the bark. It also takes away all sorts of nutrients from the tree, not only in the soil, but it blocks sunlight from reaching the leaves. So it does a great damage to your shrubs and your trees. Its leaves are opposite to subopposite, glossy ovate with toothed margins. It forms very, very thick carpets, blocking germination of native species. It will climb over itself, forming a very dense mat. The climbing vines, as pictured, are what flower and produce a seed. That seed will then be spread by wildlife. So if you have this climbing up your tree, you want to prioritize management of that vine that's climbing. You don't want it to produce any seeds. You want to get it under control. The flowers are quite small. You can see them in the picture there. But then the berries will follow, and that's what's allowing this plant to spread. This is what the vine looks like with the leaves present. You can see the toothed edge on those leaves. There is some variation that you might find on this plant as far as leaf color, but you'll want to look to the opposite leaves, the toothed edge. It's an evergreen, so it'll be green all year. That is purple winter creeper. Next up is English ivy. English ivy was introduced from England, Europe, and Asia in the colonial times. It is an evergreen climbing vine similar to the purple winter creeper. Its leaves are alternate, waxy or a leathery feel, usually green with whitish veins, extremely variable shape from unlobed to 3 to 5 lobes. It spreads by bird dispersed seeds and by, of course, the trailing and climbing vines. So it will creep along the ground and then it'll begin to climb up the tree. Purple winter creeper does the same thing. It begins on the ground and then it'll climb the trees. Both purple winter creeper and English ivy produce a flower and the berries when it climbs. English ivy is an aggressive invader of forests and open areas. It will kill the tree that it covers. It's toxic if ingested. You will find those flowers from June to October, and the fruits October to May. The fruits are going to be pale green to dark blue and then turning to black when ripened. You can see several images there. The variation of the leaves is because of all the different cultivars. You can see it blanketing the ground and then climbing the tree in the image on the upper left. This is what the fruits and flowers look like. Okay, next up is Chinese Wisteria. This is a tall, woody, climbing vine that will girdle trees. The leaves are alternately compound, and you can see in the image there are 7 to 13 leaflets. So each one of those is a leaf, and then you count the leaflets. The leaflets have a very wavy edge. The flowers are showy purple and in clusters, long dangling clusters. You can see that in the image in the upper corner. Seeds are in a long bean-like fuzzy pod. We have a native wisteria that has a smooth pod. So if you're wondering if you have the native or the invasive, you want to feel the pods. You can imagine how this vine was introduced because of those showy flowers. Folks might be planting it for that reason, but we have a native variety that has very similar flowers that you can replace this invasive vine with. So you want to look for either American wisteria or Kentucky wisteria as an alternative. The invasive Chinese wisteria varieties will do this to the woods. So you can see the trees are beginning to break under the weight of that wisteria vine. It'll bring down those trees, and you can see it climbing over everything, so it's taking away all the nutrients that would be available to those trees and everything in the understory. Oriental Bittersweet is our next vine. Tall, deciduous, woody vine, introduced in the mid-1800s as an ornamental from Asia. Leaves are alternate, mostly round, 2 to 5 inches long. The flowers and fruits are clustered in the leaf axils. They begin green in summer, then they will turn yellow to orange in fall, and then they burst open when ripened to reveal a reddish to orange fruit inside. Oriental Bittersweet has the ability to twine up around itself. And so it quickly forms this dense mat, which will, of course, shade out all native shrubs and trees, girdle even the largest of trees, and weigh them down to break that canopy of the tree. An unfortunate thing is it also will hybridize with our native American bittersweet. This is what the leaves look like. You can see the berries there in summertime. They're that green color. And this is what they look like when they're ripened and have burst open. This image on the right is of our native bittersweet. So I wanted to show you that because you want to make sure that you are not controlling that vine, but controlling the Oriental variety of bittersweet. So you can see the difference in the berries, but another way to tell is Oriental Bittersweet will have the berries just all over it, very densely covered in berries. The native bittersweet will only have the berries dangling at the very end of that branch. So those are terminal or at the very end, whereas the Oriental Bittersweet will have them all over the axils in great big clusters. If you're not sure if you have the native or the invasive, you can always send your regional specialist some images. One vine that we want everyone to be on the watch for are these swallowwort vines. Not only black swallowwort, but pale swallowwort. They look very similar and they are both invasive. The leaves are dark green on the black swallowwort and medium green on the pale swallowwort. Flowers are quite similar in structure, just a little difference in the color. But you can see those pods on the black swallowwort is going to be less than 2 centimeters. On the pale swallowwort, they're much bigger. They're going to be greater than 2 centimeters. Both of these species we need documentation on. So if you think that you have seen it, we need images and we need these documented. You can see the map of where they've been documented. We definitely want to make sure that neither of these are spreading in our state. We want to be very proactive about controlling these. So both of these plants, these invasive vines, will create dense thickets that smother native plants. But most unfortunate is that these plants have the ability to kill our monarch caterpillars. When they ingest these swallowworts, They actually are toxic to them and poison them. But if you think you have this, we want to see those images and make sure that we're controlling them properly so they don't spread. So how do you control these invasive vines? You can do manual or mechanical. So anytime in the year you can be pulling these vines. There is no limit on that. But if you are pulling them, you must make sure that you're bagging and discarding all plant parts. Even the smallest piece of a vine could have the ability to create roots and then grow again. You want to cut those climbing vines to prevent that seed production. And you can string trim or weed eat and mow in advance of a foliar chemical control. So that would be a two-step process where you're mowing and then coming back and spraying. Especially if you're not in that window of control that we recommend, this could be an option for you to just kind of keep it at bay. If you're using a chemical, you'll want to cut surface treat those climbing vines, especially on the winter creeper, the English ivy, the large bittersweet, and wisteria vines. You want to cut those, cut a nice section out, and then paint on an herbicide immediately. Foliar application and dormant season of use of a glyphosate or a triclopyr plus surfactant to limit that off-target damage. On swallowworts, you can spray them after flowering has begun, and plants that are sprayed before pods form will probably not produce a viable seed crop that season. So that's important. If you get ahead of it, you might not have any more seeds being produced. When in doubt, follow our calendar of control. All of the vines that we just talked about are on that calendar to help you out and get you started. Kudzu is in its own space and time with control. This one was native to is native to Japan and Southeast Asia. It's an aggressive vine. It grows up to a foot per day. And it will grow over everything and anything. You can see in the image there is only kudzu in that picture. Everything else has been smothered out. It spreads by multiple ways. Through runners, so stems that root at the tip when in contact with moist soil. It spreads by rhizomes and also by vines that will root at the nodes. So this plant, if a little piece of it hits the ground, it can actually root and grow a whole new plant. Kudzu is also a host plant for Asian soybean rust, which can reduce soybean yields from 10 to 80%. So that can be really, really awful for our Indiana farmers. You can see the images there of what the leaves look like and the flower. So with kudzu in particular, we do have programs in place and we want to be documenting them, documenting this plant and sending it to Ken. So Ken's contact is there for DNR, and you want to send those images if you think that you have kudzu. You can see the map of our state and all of the places where we have documented kudzu in our state. There are 43 counties and 206 sites with 224 acres that are confirmed. These are initially discovered and documented acreage sites over the last 17 years. So if you think you have kudzu, we want to make sure that you are properly identifying it. So we want some images and send those to Ken. Get a hold of him and make sure that we are documenting that plant. So we covered all of those vine species, evergreen and deciduous. Remember to look at your calendar of control. There's some great recommendations there. The evergreen vines, we discussed that you can control them in the dormant season when our native species aren't present. So October through March is a really good time to be controlling those evergreen vines with a foliar spray. You can see you can start gearing up to manage in June the invasive Wisteria, Clematis, and Bittersweet. So where do you begin? You've learned about all these species throughout our series, but how do you get started? First step is to identify what you have on your property. So walk your entire property, write down what you have, what's present, and you may need to do this through multiple seasons to make sure that you're documenting all plants. So write down what you have. If you're not sure on identification, of course, reach out to your closest regional specialist and we'll help you out. And then you can begin to prioritize depending on the time of year, infestation size, what are your resources, considering time and money, and then identify your expectations for your property. Are you managing as wildlife habitat? Do you have program obligations that you're currently enrolled in? Are you hoping to increase your timber production? Or maybe hunting grounds is your goal? Or perhaps you're doing some farming on your land. So want to identify that before you do anything else. These are your ways to start prioritizing before you begin any management. This is a part of a document that I have put into the box folder for all of our participants. This was put together by Indiana Native Plant Society and Ella Jacart. And this is going to help you get started with a point system. So you will be able to take these points, add them up, and summarize how to begin to control what is your top priority. So you'll look at each plant species and say, how much do I have? What's the value of the habitat being invaded? What impacts is it causing? And how hard is it to control? Add up those points, and the lower the score of that plant, the higher that priority. So cheap and easy is very often going to be your top priority. And those low infestations of an invasive species are obviously going to be a smaller population that you can control and remove from your property the soonest. So this is a great way to get you started. And then you might want to start considering what tools you will need to acquire depending on what you have on your property to begin managing. So a chainsaw, a battery or gas powered. The battery chainsaws are quite a bit lighter than the gas powered. So it just depends on what you need for your land. Loppers, clippers, a folding saw, a face shield, safety glasses, ear protection, gloves. You're using herbicide. You want to make sure you're wearing some gloves, especially. Sturdy shoes, chaps, if you're using a chainsaw. A spill kit is essential. If you were to spill herbicide, you want to make sure that you have something there to clean it up. Herbicide daubers, spray bottle, paintbrush, tank sprayers. A way to distribute that herbicide dependent upon what you're treating, of course. If you're foliar spraying, you're going to need a tank sprayer. If you are doing cut surface treatment, you need either a dauber or a spray bottle. You can also paint the herbicide on. So just figure out what you're managing and how you're going to distribute that herbicide, and then determine what tool you'll need. You can also employ some contractors, perhaps, with some heavier equipment for you on your land, dependent upon what you are managing, of course. So a brush cutter, a brush hog, or a bull hog can be quite helpful on some of these invasive species. Tank or boom sprayers, a weed burner or weed dragon with a propane tank, brush mower, and a fecon. A fecon barrel roller is pictured there. What that does is it mulches everything. So you will then have to return to do a treatment of what you have just mulched. So those are some options for you. Here's an image of a brush cutter that you can use. You might need to get some of these equipment for you on your land. There are other ways that you can make a difference. Perhaps you've already managed all of these invasives, or you're working on maybe a state park or public land, and you don't have any invasives on your land. But how else can you get involved? Well, you can plant natives. We talked about some of these native vines that are great and great for wildlife. Here you can see some of the names of native vines and also the species that they're supporting. So if you were to keep that grapevine, Virginia creeper, or poison ivy, look at all the native wildlife that you will be providing for. And we talked about Japanese honeysuckle. You could replace that Japanese honeysuckle with coral honeysuckle. You can see the pink coral color flower there on the bottom left. That is a beautiful vine that also provides for our wildlife. So consider removing these invasive vines and replanting with a native vine species. You can also have one of your regional specialists out to do a landowner survey and technical assistance. If we come to your property and let you know what invasives you have, we will then also write up a management plan that will begin to help you as you prioritize and begin to move forward with management of invasives on your property. So reach out to your closest regional specialists and we will help get you started. And then documenting and mapping these invasives is very important. This will give us an idea of where the problems are in our state. And there are multiple ways that you can do that. You can go online to edmaps.org/Indiana and view all the invasive species and help us document them. So if you're out in the field and you're taking images of plants, we want you to document those invasives that have spread. So don't document the plants that are in your landscaping, but document the ones that have spread out into the natural environment. If you have an iPhone, currently we are still using Great Lakes Early Detection Network app, so download that now. But we will all be switching over on our smart devices to the EdMaps 1. So Android, currently, if you have an Android, you can download the EdMaps 1, and we will all be switching to that soon. So not only is this going to be very helpful for us to document these invasives, but this is also a really great tool for you. You can look at all the images of the invasive species in our state on these tools. So very helpful and at no cost. Want to make sure that Throughout the series, I thank all of the individuals that provided images for the presentations in our series. So thank you, everybody, for all of these great images. Again, thank you for joining us. Hope that you're able to view all of the presentations. There is my contact information and our website listed. We also have social media sites that you can go on, Facebook and also Instagram. We are always putting great information on both of those avenues, so check those out and send us those images of plants that you're not sure of, either through text or through my email address there. And thank you again for joining us.